see a thing saying this is being recorded and accept that. And that means we should be ready to go.
So, hello. Actually, I'm looking forward to discussing professional methods of screenplay reading with experts from various fields. So, I feel a little bit strange as a practitioner with all these academics around me, but I think it's a very good mixture. As at the Screenwriting Research Networks, three groups come together: academics, teachers, and practitioners. Each of these groups reads screenplays professionally according to their background, education, and with different goals and different intentions. Academics have scientific or epistemological questions. We in the practice, we don't use so complicated words, which would be one difference. We try to make ourselves understand for everybody. Your questions come from your research focus in the context of literature, semantics, historical or film studies or whatsoever. I'm very keen of learning more about this as a practitioner. I'm jealous as I lack time to look really deep into the method we use. I don't know if you know who I am. Perhaps I should say I'm speaking as a practitioner, and we have a script service since the 1980s, and we with our team we evaluated more than 3,000 scripts during the ages, and that's the background I'm talking today. I know where our method comes from, and I know that it works very well, as I can compare our evaluations and estimations with the results in the real world, such as admissions, for example. But I have some questions on our own method of script evaluation that I could only answer with the help of researchers. So, but I said we lack the time, so we only use it. However, there are also questions and areas of research that practitioners have no understanding of. In particular, when people educated in universities work in editorial offices, funding agencies, or at film festivals, where films are created, promoted, and supported that are deliberately not intended to find an audience. I think you know what I'm speaking about, and I think we agree that it is a shame. A short excursion. Film critics hardly ever read scripts. They watch films, talk about them, and systematically forget or deliberately ignore the screenwriters. I mention this because most of them were trained at universities. After a few years in film criticism, some of them become festival directors, selecting films without ever having seriously engaged with their basics, the screenplays. European screenwriters associations are fighting for screenwriters to be given equal credit with directors. It's a fight against windmills, but we are not giving up. And I may say I'm a member of the Writers Guild of Germany, so I'm here as a guild member too. Scholars at universities and teachers at film schools also read screenplays together with their students. In recent years, a cast has emerged that has learned from lecturers at universities. They obtain one or more academic degrees. Now they teach with their theoretical knowledge new generations of screenplay readers and writers who want to gain foothold in the film business, many of whom end up teaching at universities or film schools or as film critics. A circle of people with no or too little practical experience in filmmaking, promotion, etc. And here I have to quote that I'm speaking from Europe as a European. Perhaps we think in the US it's different, so make this statements or connect it with the European woman speaking here. In view of stagnating success rates in European cinema, it would be advisable to rethink this circle. Teachers at film schools and universities face the greatest challenges when it comes to script reading. They must master scientific methods of script reading, and they must be able to teach them. Furthermore, they must know and master the script reading methods of the film business in order to be able to teach them as well. Everybody is able to read a script, but scripts must be studied with professional skills. It would be a great advantage if university teachers and teachers at film schools had fundamental experience in the film industry. Unfortunately, most of those who work successfully in the business do not have the time to get involved in teaching, and most practitioners don't have the talent to teach. You definitely need three things to train people well. You need to know the subject theoretically and from practical experience, and you have to be able to teach. It is very rare that all three skills come together in one person. We have seen a huge increase in the number of university departments and film schools since the 1980s. At the same time, the success of European films has stagnated at around 5% of the market results. So I think we are doing something wrong here. Personally, I have a vision. Let us break the dominance of the major US productions on the world screens. To reach this goal, we need to develop excellent stories from Africa, Western and Eastern Europe, South America, and Asia. That means we must develop them fully and tell them better with this medium called film. It all starts with the professional writing and the professional reading of stories and screenplays. Writing screenplays is an art form. Therefore, reading these texts professionally requires considerable skills, experience, and the right tools. Only when we understand what is written by excluding our personal interpretation and without bias, we will be able to take the first step of finding out what the author and the creative team intend. Then we can determine whether they have been able to realize their own goals, ideas, and intentions on paper. Professional script readers and consultants can help the creative team to realize their intentions and bring them to paper. In a second step, the creative team can and should be given feedback on what aspects of their intentions would work on screen, what would resonate with the audience. This is where we should discuss whether there is more to be gained from the story, the material, or the dramatization. The first reading and development step is there to help the creative team get the most out of their material. The second reading and development and discussion step should incorporate knowledge about the audience into the consultation process. Finally, in the third reading and development step, it must be determined whether the budget and the screenplay are compatible. A big difference in professional script reading is knowing what step the project is currently in. Are we reading a masterpiece of film, a classic with retrospective interest, to learn from practical purposes or for academic research? In fact, we must study masterpieces to learn something about good script writing and how to read scripts professionally. Or are we reading a draft script, which will hopefully become a future masterpiece? Are we reading a script that deserves to be called a first draft? And should we find out how this project can become a masterpiece? Are we reading a genuine 10th draft? Most writers and producers do not distinguish between drafts and revisions. I think it's a mistake to renumber minor changes. I honestly recommend writing 1.3 first draft, third revision instead of fourth draft. As we are we reading a master scene script that deserves the name? That means, has a relevant story been told completely, and is it excellently adapted for the medium of film? 80% of the scripts we evaluated for the market either did not have a completely story or it was not fully developed for the medium of film, often both. Nevertheless, most of these films were made but didn't find much audience. The result, engaging stories, films do not reach an audience. They have therefore failed to achieve their intention, their purpose. Or are we reading a shooting script? Hopefully not, because this is a hard thing to do. Practitioners in the film business, such as producers or distributors, read scripts regularly and invest time and money, often a lot of money. They believe they are able to read scripts. After all, they have been doing it for years. However, they usually don't have the time to seriously address the development of the material and the individual needs of each creative team. Despite years of experience, they usually haven't enough artistic knowledge to help writers or creative teams to develop their stories and screenplays to an excellent level. That doesn't stop them from doing it anyway, which has not been good for European films in the recent decades. Here too, the problems begin with the ability to read screenplays professionally. To make matters worse, AI programs are also being used more and more in script writing and the evaluating process of in evaluating screenplays. There would be nothing wrong with this if the legal issues surrounding this enormous rate had been clarified, and if the creative talents had been compensated for their work, and if AI users knew that they still have to read and understand the scripts themselves, especially those in development. Professional script readers have a system, a method of keeping their tastes, preferences, and blind spots out of their evaluation. I have met colleagues who had a sound theoretical background, gained experience in the film industry, and continued to educate themselves. They became brilliant in reading and evaluating screenplays. Some of them would not say they have a method, but as these colleagues work methodologically and systematically, and as they are able to keep their own opinions and beliefs out of the process, I say they have a method. Others came from a practical background, produced films, bought licenses, and wondered why their politically important and aesthetically outstanding films were not finding an audience. Some of these practitioners studied theory and then went back to practice and teaching. I was very lucky to learn from one of these people. So let us point out that professional screenplay readers need to be clear about who is reading, with what background and training. What is the purpose, interest behind the reading? What will the result be used for? According to our experience, every professional script reader has a method to gain distance, like a good psychologist who keeps his or her likes, dislikes, political views, etc., out of the analysis process. I'm very excited to learn about different methods of screenplay reading from various academic disciplines during these online sessions. As a practitioner, I'm speaking about the importance of professional screenplay readings in the film business. I must dash an illusion. Even in business, there are a large number of people who regularly read screenplays, even invest money, and yet understand far too little about screenplays and the development process. I'm referring to producers, distributors, world sales peoples, directors, editors, and broadcasters and streamers, even to dramaturgs and authors. I'm a practitioner who reads and evaluates screenplays for the film industry. Our evaluations serve as a basis for license buyer or investors to decide whether or not to invest. But they must decide themselves. We don't tell them if the script is good or bad, or if they should invest money. We evaluate the weaknesses and the strong elements after our professional study of the script. I read scripts in case of copyright infringements. Here we compare different versions of screenplays written by different authors who have a conflict. We read to find out who is entitled to what copyright share. This is a very specific kind of reading screenplays and has nothing to do with quality or improvement. For me, this kind of reading scripts is tough and quite boring. I very much prefer reading screenplays in development to work with creative teams on their stories and their dramatization so that the screenplays become as good as possible. I read sometimes for national and European film funding agencies, such as the German or the Austrian Federal Film Board or Eurimages. I read screenplays as a member of screenplay juries at film festivals to nominate award winners. This is easy and lovely. I read masterpieces to train myself or to relate these masterpieces to the project of our workshop participants. My reading of screenplays is always based on the same tried and tested criteria, but the statements require very different weightings, and the conclusions drawn from the evaluation are presented differently to the clients. For example, an evaluation discourages investors, sponsors, or license buyers from investing money. But an evaluation should never discourage a creative team. The evaluation, the conclusions are the same, but they are presented softer and not so directly to writers, so that the creative team can use these notes to further develop their story and their script. The basis for professional script reading is a system that allows you to gain and maintain professional distance. At our company, we use a method that comes from practical experience, further developed with exceptional script specialists, backed up with theory and then brought back into practice. In a challenging learning process between theory and practice, our method was brought to life by experience in film production and distribution, the encounter with František, Frank Daniel, Paul Schrader's meticulous and unique approach to script writing, which he has been using for his early and successful works. Studies of drama theories, psychoanalysis, and a lot of good and outstanding film scripts and films. Our method sheds lights to the author's intentions and his or her story in their psychoanalytical nature. It exposes the strengths, weaknesses, and above all, black holes of the story and the script. Last but not least, it helps the analyst to minimize his or her emotional involvement and to gain and maintain objectivity by establishing the analysis. A detailed script analysis must be merciless, but it is a good basis for the revision and the further development of story and script. We know that every successful film is based on a good and professionally worked out script. A film's impact on the audience is intrinsically bound to the quality of its script. Based on a bad script, you will shoot a bad film with no chance to become successful. With a good script, your chances raise to 50%. It doesn't matter which method you use to maintain distance. It is just important that you have one. Finding out whether rules have been followed is not enough. It's useful to know the rules or supposed rules and to know what they are but you also have to know at the same time that they are of limited value. Although you all are professionals, and I'm sure you already know, professional script reading means that you have to read the screenplay at least twice. The deeper your analysis and the more demanding your evaluation, the more often you will have to work through the script. Since everybody in our company is human and not AI, we use the 4 or more eye principle. Else, multiple readings by different professional colleagues automatically bring different perspectives and help avoid blind spots. Our reading teams differ in sex, age, cultural background, and more come from different continents. We must do so as AI evaluation tools are currently not good enough. All our colleagues are well trained and familiar with our method. This means we speak the same creative language, use the same criteria, and we know each other's blind spots. So here today, I'm only concentrating on the first point, on the basis of the system we use, but it is the basis for everything. Every analysis begins with a professional reading. Not everyone who can read, who is literate, is able to assess the value of a screenplay. The ability of reading scripts professionally must be studied and trained, the craft as well as the artistic use. Screenwriting has much more to do with composing than with writing. It is definitely a far cry from literature. Just as a score is music on paper, the script is film on paper. Sadly enough, we use the same words and letters like everybody else for every other text and don't have a system like notes. Writing film, writing animated, dramatized pictures, scenes, composing sequences and acts by typing words and letters is a contradiction in itself, kind of squaring a circle. Writing screenplays is an art form. Therefore, reading these texts professionally requires considerable skill, experience, and the right tools. A screenplay transports a story that is adapted for the difficult and very realistic-looking medium which is called film. This means that it is told dramatically, excitingly, and completely, and as visually as possible for a big screen. Inexperienced readers of scripts like or dislike the story, the content. If they like the story, they think they have read a good script. They cannot assess the quality or the deficiency of the dramatic structure of this and the cinematic solutions and more. But even more important, experienced readers must not rely exclusively on their knowledge and experience. Their personal preferences, opinions, and worldviews and values may not influence their script analysis. Every good script analyst, every professional story editor has a technique to ensure this, just like a professional, well-trained psychotherapist. We use the time-consuming 40 steps method as the basis for the analysis of scripts, but also to gain and maintain distance to our individual feelings during the process. Regarding the dramatic structure of storytelling, there is no difference between documentary and feature films. Both must transport strong, relevant, emotional content. This works on two levels, the story level and the plot level. By plot, we mean the course of action, the action visible on screen. Story is the narration behind it, created by the plot. It's what ultimately interests and touches the audience and transports the writer's true and deepest intention. It is essential to develop and tell the two interrelated, interdependent levels with equal care. Beside a lot more elements, a story needs a main character or several protagonists, a strong theme, and an important overall goal that is achieved in a drama, partly achieved in a melodrama, or not achieved in the tragedy. A fully developed story for a full-length feature film or documentary includes about 40 story steps. These events, happenings, actions push the main character, the protagonists, step by step closer to the main goal. Too often, only the plot level is developed. Too often, the more important story level is incomplete and weak. Around 80% of the international scripts that we have reviewed either lacked a fully narrated story or were poorly adapted for film, usually both. And here we are talking about film scripts which have already got over some obstacles. Usually they are represented on the international market by a sales company and are looking for distributors and investors. This means that a script analyst in the film business rarely deals with masterpieces, but usually with work in progress. A masterpiece is much easier to read and analyze than a weak script with an incomplete story and an undecided or wrongly chosen main character. On the one hand, a professional script reader should eliminate his or her personal preferences during the analysis of a script. On the other hand, the reader must find out what the writer is hiding. Most of the writers are afraid to put some of his or her feelings on the table. They don't want to declare for what personal reasons they just wrote this story or adapted this particular story into a script. So here again, a professional reader has to square a circle. So, and this was my impulse reading. I thought we could have some questions, and I also brought here some stories, basic stories for you, which we use in a tabular evaluation for covers, reading reports, or analysis. We could also discuss the classical criteria of analysis, which a reader also must have in mind during reading and studying scripts. We also give out to all our clients and students an additional form, list of questions, which they can also use for discuss it themselves. And we could also discuss how we teach script analysis to people who do not want to read. So.
Well, first of all, we definitely want to thank you for being here today and offering this up to us. It's a very, very interesting, certainly to me. And thank you. We want more practitioners to join, right, with all of us. So it's a really good, the nice thing about the SRN is that blend, that we have the people who teach, the people who do, and the people who do both teach and do. And we see a lot of that melding happen more in Europe often than happens here in the States. But anyway, I definitely want to say thank you. We want to say thank you to all the folks who found us along the way. We're sorry about the confusion, but we took care of it, and we're happy to have all the folks here. I also want to thank Gabriele for making a presentation in English. I told her before we started the recording how impressed I always am with everyone in the world who can do this thing that we somehow don't teach Americans. So I am trying desperately to learn Italian to be more connected to the homeland of my grandparents, and I know how hard it is as a grown-up to do that. So I definitely want to say thank you to everyone who both presents in English when they're at a conference or in one of these working groups, and of course, those who are listening in a second language. Outside of that, I wasn't intending to run this event, so I think we should just all start. Who has questions and whatnot, we're going to pass them on. Feel free to unmute and just go for it. I think we can do that, and if we talk over each other, obviously we'll pause and wait for our turn. But I'd love to hear what people have to say. I took several notes, and I'm already planning on going backwards to look at your slideshow again to get some more information. And I'll just start by saying we definitely agree, or at least I agree here in the States, that the screenwriter has never been given enough attention, and it has been very difficult to teach that. I find students often, one of my exercises is I begin a new group of students with naming their 5 favorite films, and then the directors of those 5 films, and then the writers. And they always know who the directors are, and they only know the writers if they were writer-directors. And so it starts to make them realize how the way that they've been taught and the way the media works, they've been taught only that blah, blah, the film is the director's voice and all that nonsense. So it's a hard thing to teach against, but people who are writers are getting more excited about that. And I'll just say that I often use books like this. This is a book about how John Michael Hayes worked with Hitchcock. Everyone talks about a Hitchcock movie, but he never wrote a damn thing. John Michael Hayes wrote the 4 of his most popular films, and Joan Harrison wrote Rebecca, which got an Academy Award nomination.
And we should also discuss Mrs. Hitchcock at this.
There you go.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yes, Alma Reville did brilliant work, and he does mention her. But anyway, so that's all I have to say. I could say a whole lot more, but I want to open it up. So, people, what do you have to say about what we heard and what you can contribute about your own experience reading scripts or teaching the reading of scripts? Somebody? Otherwise, I'll
Yeah.
keep going.
Hi. Hi. Hello. Turning on my video. Um, Hello. Thank you so much for a really interesting presentation. I very much enjoyed that. So sorry, my phone's ringing in the background. I hope we can just ignore that for a second. So I had, yeah, there were lots of really interesting points that came out of that. And one of the couple of things that struck me, and I should first of all say that I teach. I have an academic background, but I also very much work in the industry and have a background in the film industry, actively being on set, etc. So I do have those various sides to the way that I practice as a reader and as a script editor. I was really interested in the fact that you ask your readers to take emotion out of it. And I think I know what you mean, that you're talking a lot about what I would call taste rather than, and you go on to talk about beliefs as well. I want to come on to that in a second. Um, because despite the fact that my practice as a reader and editor is very much grounded in theory and psychological theory, and obviously um, kind of structural theory and so on, I read a script first and foremost with emotional interest and really respond to scripts in terms of my own emotional engagement, taking my taste preferences out of the equation. So that was one thing. I was wondering whether, like, what you thought about that. But I also just wanted to say one other thing as well relating to this, which is worldviews. Because in the UK, um, I suspect this is probably true for other countries with funding bodies. But if we are looking for a film to get the go ahead, for example, from get BFI public funding, there are certain values that we would be definitely looking for in that film, including diversity and inclusion, and actually now including more positive messages about climate change. So being responsible in that way. So I felt that we can't entirely take um, opinions and worldviews out of our reading. There are some things that we do need to consider. But I do understand, obviously, if you came into this as a, you know, with some horrendous worldviews that didn't kind of go along with what was being prescribed by the national funder, that you would definitely need to remove those. But maybe coming back to the emotions, how do you feel about that? I'm going to disappear again. I'm going to turn my video off, but I'd love to hear from anybody that wants to respond, or you, Gabrielle.
I I would like to clarify. When I first read a script, I try to understand what the writer, the writers, the creative team intended. I try to understand that, and I'm in the second course of reading, I try to find out with putting my head on and my analytical brain on what did they achieve and what did they not achieve according to their own premises. So I really want to understand what this creative team wants to say, and did they succeed in it? And then it's, of course, I'm not interested at all who has been the writer. If it's an experienced person, if it's a famous person or not, I just look at it, what is on the paper, what might come over to the screen. And this is the first thing I try to understand. And then I put on my analytical brain and check it through all these criterias, and not in the same order logically. So not, but with the attention this specific screenplay needs. So of course I have a certain political, well, we make ourselves very much clear where we stand, where we come from, and we also make this clear to the clients. But during the evaluation process, in the first phase, I really try to help the creativity of the creative team to come as to life. And I think it's a problem if we too early put things into this, also by for example, in Germany. All these criteria you said, climate change, diversity, etc., etc. I also think it's very much important, but you shouldn't confront the creative team upfront to it. Either they have a story that's going with it, or they don't have it. The story has to be told. You still can decide if you want to fund this story or to put your private money or your company money into this story, but not trying to push people to write in a certain direction. They do it anyway because they come out from society, and usually they have something important to say. And if they want and have something important to say, I would like to help them that they say it in a way that a lot of people want to see this movie. We have in Europe the problem that they are highly they have very important stories, but they tell them quite so that we sleep away. So that's the problem. So
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, Susie.
I really, really loved your presentation. Thank you. And it sounds like a really thorough and excellent way of approaching the whole assessing scripts for the different markets. So I wanted to ask about, I just wanted to firstly say I recently became a co-writer on a project with a German Italian, now living in America, writer. That was a lovely film, and she'd worked on it for 10 years and asked me to do some notes, and then and I came at it very much from a more, this is lovely, but is anyone going to pay to sit and watch this in the cinema, from a much more kind of, I wouldn't say commercial, but more practical approach. And she asking me to co-write it. But yeah, it is I think it is an issue with sometimes with European facing works. They just need to have that little injection of what the audience, a fidgety audience, are going to want to see. But what I wanted to ask was about the I'm recently become very interested in training up, possibly self-taught, because it's hard to find an actual training course in how to not just do script reports, which is a script reader and a script editor, but specifically for the environmental side, because I think that is massive now. And I personally think that by the time you get into production and you're doing your your carbon footprint for the BFI production, that really you really want to be looking at that much earlier on in the script, not just the way the writer brings in as a Trojan horse. Unfortunately, it has to be Trojan horse, because if you're too upfront, they don't like it. Netflix will say no, and that's where we are. But certainly bringing in that the fact that your characters and your world have accepted that there is something happening out there, but also to bring in more from the writers. And I think this is what I suppose I want to ask you, because normally you think, well, screenwriters don't not necessarily have a great knowledge of production. They've not necessarily worked at that end of things. Whereas because I started as a film editor, I've produced my own short films. I'm also very keen that writers do think about the environmental impact of how they're putting their story together. So obviously you don't want to crush the creativity, but having that awareness could impact then when it hopefully what eventually goes into production. It's just going to reduce the number of changes they're going to have to make to the script later in order to make it more environmentally and actually less costly quite often to the production. So I wonder if you've had experience of that in the work that you're doing.
This was the point, which was very short put out. At this third level, you have to find out if the script is fitting the budget, or the budget fitting the script. This has to go together. Otherwise, you have a brilliant script, but the budget is too low and you will have a flop anyway. So in this stage, in this later stage, all these things should be discussed. And also upfront, by using AI, we don't have to forget that is using whole lot of energy, which nobody realizes how much all these tech bros are trying to build their own atomic power stations, small ones, so that they can have enough for the. So I think I'm absolutely d'accord with you. But as long as we work on the paper, it's not so much about the footprint. It's in a later phase. We should not start from the beginning, but I always say to them, you don't have to think about the budget. Even if you come from Germany and most of the films are with 3 million or something like that, if you want to write $100 million film, then write it. It's very cheap to put it on the paper, and either one has to find the solution to make it for the budget that is reasonable in their territory, or it's such a brilliant thing that one of these US majors will buy it from right away then. So, but in the beginning, that's what I was meant. You have to know in which state the project is in. And also it's important to know who is your client, your customer. Of course, I'm talking to the creatives to bring their ideas to the paper, and then I confront them with the audience and what might the audience get of it. But also, if the producer or an investor is your client, you can make the same evaluation, but you speak right directly into his or her face, which we do not do with the creative team. We say the same things, but much softer and nicer and not directly. So because they have to find their solutions themselves. You have to bring them, to convince them, to seduce them, to find the solutions for their ideas and interpretations. As soon as you tell them how it's going to be, they make they go in an opposition, absolutely psychological understanding, but it doesn't serve the project.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Before we go to the next question, I do want to put in the chat, there was the mention, you made the mention of how we don't have enough stories from Africa and Asia. And I don't know how many of you folks know about the Palgrave podcast that Paolo and Klaus and Rosamund are putting together, but they just, their most recent one was a discussion with Ziffo and Lalo, and I'm going to put their names in the chat too, because that would be worth listening to if that, of course, is interesting to you. So that is available online in case you hadn't caught that. That covers that. Now, other thoughts people have, other questions? Oh, Alexander, go for it.
Okay, Gabriele, thank you for your presentation. I think I've heard it parts of it I heard before, several years ago. You mentioned several times the word complete or fully developed story, something like that. I was hoping that you could explain a little bit more what you mean by a complete story, or maybe you have an example that we all know, or on the other hand, what would make a story incomplete? What is your criteria here? And then secondly, I have a question for the academics among us. I'm a practitioner. You made this distinction between plot and story, and also in that context, you used the word, or you define story as the narration behind it. And I was wondering what the academics among us think about that wording. Is that, I don't know, is that language that you use in an academic context, or what is your definition of narration versus story versus plot? How does that fit together in your universe? Maybe first.
I should start with this question of complete.
Yes, please.
Yes. Actually, our philosophy comes from the people who were buying licenses, and it comes from practitioners who found out that their stories, which were important to them, as they were from the Zurich film. So I'm confused. Our roots go back to the political engaged times of Europe. And these people made films and created films and bought films from all over the world and showed them to their territories because they wanted to make a world a better place. And they found out the people don't go and see the films. So some of these practitioners who were had experience in producing world sales and domestic distribution found out that their stories are told too weakly. And then they got a further training, and there where František Daniel comes into the game, and they learned, these practitioners learned theory from a great screenplay teacher and a script analyst. And it was a lucky coincidence that some of these people also met Paul Schrader, and he had a very own way of writing his early scripts. He started to tell his story to people, normal people, friends, people of the business, until he had his whole story on one page with 30 or 40 steps. And then he sat down and wrote the script. He didn't know, he's a Calvinist, so nobody should be taught to write things like that. But as these practitioners got the information that he did it, so they did it the other way around. So they tried it out with some classics. For example, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. So they found out that a story for about 100 minutes usually has around 40 story steps defined from the goal and so on. And then we also used it for scripts in development, and most of the European films have about 26 steps. So we can say they are not complete, therefore they are boring, therefore they don't find their audience. Most of the films in Europe, so Cuckoo's Nest would end with the boat trip. No, the normal European films ends there. It's about in the middle of the film. So there we have a tool, this story step outline. It's not from the plot. The plot is the superficial thing you see on the screen, but also what's the story really about? It's about freedom. It's about responsibility. And then if you find out this, you can figure out such a story step outline, and then you figure out how many steps are in this certain script. And we, in our experience, can say if it's around 40 steps for 100-minute films, then the audience is interested. If it's too much, it's too much for the audience. They get confused. But if it's too little, and that's the normal thing as we have it in Europe, then they get bored. And then this film doesn't get positive word of mouth, and so it can't become a success in the cinema. And therefore we use plot and story to distinguish. Often they concentrate on plot. And that's also in lots of books like Linda Segar and Sid Fields. You have these rules, and these are concentrating on focusing on plot. So everybody learns about plot, but hardly anybody learns and is talking about story, and it's much more. Therefore, this picture was, the plot is very small and the story is the whole thing. It's like an iceberg. You see there's little on the top, but the film and the emotional impact is much more. It's the whole iceberg, and 2/3 of it are underwater, and that's what we think it's a story. And from this, we make this step outline.
Is that what you were listening for, Alex?
What was your question? Sorry.
Is that that's what you were asking? That you got the right answer?
Yeah, I mean, I can relate to this distinction. Yeah, I was the first part, the of your answer. I'm still struggling to understand what complete means. I was not expecting the answer to be a number, like 40 steps, or would that apply to serial storytelling as well? The 40 steps, or?
Yes, but we use it only. For example, if you have Titanic and you find it on our webpage, also with some of the story step outlines, so you can see how we define a step, and we did it. Titanic, for example, I think was 152 minutes and had 46 steps or 50. I don't know. Read it. So I listed it. So
I mean, should the series Fargo, for example, have the same 40 steps in the movie Fargo, or?
I did not do I didn't test it.
Okay.
Let me just add before we get to Miriam, I'm going to put in the chat, we were talking about all these different books, and we tend to speak of Sid Fields and other guys who I have to tell you, couldn't write. They could tell you how to analyze the script, but they actually couldn't write. Or John Truby, not that I should probably put that publicly. But Joel Selba, who had been an early member of the SRN, has a book on story structure that is from the character's point of view. And I think that might be something we're interested in, and that it's what the character is trying to achieve and how you go through the stages of that achievement that keeps the audience interested, and then whatever the plot is around them. That's how she distinguishes the two. So if that's useful to folks, that's a link to a discussion, and then you can find her book elsewhere. But she is an SRM member, so I always feel like we should support ourselves and not the dudes from the outside. But Miriam, it's up to you. And we'll probably go till the half hour. We were going to go for about an hour and a half, and we started late. So we'll probably go for another 15 minutes or so. So Miriam, please go for it.
Hi, I was actually responding to Alexander's second question, where he had talked about how academicians look at plot, story, and narration. So basically, what we do as academicians when we look at students, we talk about putting the story first, putting out the entire story first as a story and then as a plot. So that is a fabula, where you have these raw chronological events which are there mostly in sequence, and that brings the entire story together as a very linear story. And then that story is broken into sujets, or you can say plots, where the entire story is broken into these smaller events and sub-events. And then later on, these events or plots are then put out together and made into a narration. So just to say, maybe you can say that the story is the inferred chronological events that are in the digesters or the world of the story, which also function in a way that it exists in the mind of the audience. Many a times there's a background story also to it, as layers which comes up. The plot, which we usually refer to, is the specific presentation of different events in a film. So which clearly shows what the viewer is seeing or hearing. And then the narration, which is the process and the style of storytelling, along with which the themes and the tropes of the film also come out. And then it becomes a mediation between the story and the viewer. So this is mostly how we come across. And in order to do this, what we mostly do while we're dealing with students is that we many a times ask the students to come up with a story. So they come up with a story, and then we ask in a workshop to put that story into different genres. And I know that genre is a very contested term. It has these very liminal boundaries, but still you can still look at a film and put it in a certain genre, and different films work in different genres. So what we do is we ask them to come up with the story, then we ask them to get into groups and think about the same story, how they're going to put up in different genres. Based on that, and this goes on like a month-long workshop where they do their work, go back, reflect on it, and then come back again. And towards the end, they come up with a budget, they come up with a proper pitch, which they make in front of internal and external faculty, and based on which, out of, say, if there are 10 projects, 5 or 4 of them get approved. So this is how we go ahead.
And I would like to add, often projects are coming to us, and of course they are coming as a script. And often we recommend the authors to go back to write in prose, to just write a story and not think about film, so that they have the story in which kind of literature thing, whatever they want. And then we try to make is to a story treatment, and then in another step to a film treatment, which becomes more dramatized, more visual and step by step. And then perhaps other steps to approach that they have to understand that they have to have a story, and then they can adapt it to the screen. But if they don't have a story, a complete story with a beginning and a middle and an end, they often come and have 100 pages of script, but it's only a first act, of course, divided in 3 acts also, because they read all these recipe books teaching them. So we prefer to we say that the writer should write as long as possible in prose, and then approach slowly the adaptation for film.
Alexandra, I would also like to add to, because you had asked about long form of story writing, that is when you write for a series and for a film. So also to say, I'm also not very familiar with this method, which is a 40-step or a 46-step method. I'm not aware of that. However, whenever we deal with a long form of storytelling, which is for a series, the entire manner in which we write becomes very different, because many a times when we look at this, at least the current long form that is coming on OTT, we are already aware of the inner story. However, it is in the presentation of that story that we are hooked, because we know what the story is about, but it is just the telling of that story, the narration of the story, how it unfolds, that brings us to that long form again and again.
And I would like to add something. You mentioned genre. In our experience, at a certain point, the story tells you how it has to be told himself. So then you can go away from recipe books, and you come and approach art. And also, this story tells you which genre would be the best for this, or which genre mix, of course. If what's the dominant could be the best dominant genre for this story. So, but this is during the process, you find it out, you try it for a certain specific, so it's a nice thing that you tell your students to go for different genres, make it a Western, make it a coming of age thing. I think it's a very interesting approach.
I'm not an archaeologist, but as an academic, I wanted to add something to Alexander's question and what Miriam said. The distinction between story and plot obviously is something very debated in narratology. There are millions of books about it. But I think basically what we normally teach students, what we normally say is that there are at least 3 levels. What is fabula, sujet, which is the whole world where everything happens. So there are many things in the fabula that will not appear in the finished product. Is it would it be a book or a novel or a film or a series, etc. Then there is the story, which is the specific presentation of selected events and existence of the fabula, of the narrated world. And then there is the discourse, the presentation, the specific presentation of the story. So you can have the same story told in a book or in a film, the same events, the same characters, etc. But obviously the presentation is different. So there are lots of theories about this, but I found it interesting that what Gabriele was saying. I think it's at least when you said it during the presentation, I interpreted it as saying the plot is the mechanics of what we see on screen, and the story is what happens inside the viewer's mind. So the whole things, the whole connections that appear in the viewer's mind when you see the story, when he or she see the film. Or at the same time, now that you were talking about like the differences between the specific events that we see on screen and the deepness of the narrative world that was developed before the screenplay became a screenplay. So is this both, or
It's much more in the screen also. You have to know your whole story so you can put your plantings and your payoffs on the right on the right thing. So you have to know everything about McMurphy in Cuckoo's Nest, for example, so that you are able to know what it's really about. He is taking responsibility, and it's all about responsibility, becoming a human being, becoming a father in all of this. So you have to know much more than what we see on the screen. Then you can give it on different layers. What is important when, how to find the right pictures and images for what you really want to tell. So it's ending up at the audience, in the psychology, in the heart, in the stomach, and not in the brain of the audience. But you have to know everything and much more to be able to condense it to the right things at the right places in the script and later on the screen.
So basically, you're just to see if I understood, you're saying that to show a character, you have to know to develop the story. In contrast to develop, if you develop the plot, you add a coup de théâtre, you add something that happens in the film. If you're developing the story, you are developing maybe the childhood of your character that will never show on screen. But if you know what happened in your character's childhood, you will develop a better character.
You
That's
have
what
you have to know where this character comes from, and also when you end this the film story, you also will know what will be happening to him or her afterwards, so that you can find during your screen time the right things that the audience might feel or even know what's where he or she came from, what happened now, and where he or she will be going to. And that it's much more than making things work mechanically. So you find during this process the whole the little things which are important for the people who make the costumes and also the makeup and everything. So everybody knows exactly what he or she has to do, and it's much more than we finally see. Yeah.
Are there other folks with questions?
if I may, just one last question. How standard do you think it is for productions, film productions, or screenwriters to ask for services like what you offer? I mean, do you think it happens regularly? I mean, produced film almost often pass through this phase with professionals reading it, or because my expertise is mainly in television series, and I feel that in Italy this happened in-house. It's not so, I mean, at least in television series in Italy, the typical case is that the production house does the developing process, and they do not ask for the services of an external agency. So is this different in Germany? Is this different in film? How do you?
We have worked with film producers or distributors, but we also have worked with companies who had their own in-house team, and either they didn't have the time or they came to a certain end, to a dead end, and then they asked for another opinion. So we have our clients are with or without in-house dramaturgs. It's used much too little, and I don't know why. Actually, especially in Germany, they shoot the film when they close the budget and not when the script is really ready to shoot, because they live on their 7.5 or 10% Handlungsunkosten. But actually, it's quite a cheap investment to make a good script to a very good script. Then you, and I also think it's a problem that smaller film projects only focus on their own home market. But I would say, and I go here much further than my own guild, we should try to develop these projects as good as possible so that we can reach about 10% of the inhabitants of your territory. So in Germany, this would be, no, 1%. Would be 800,000 people only. Most of the movies in Germany, we are happy when they have 100,000 admissions. I think it's not enough. And also we should think about saying it would be a success if a local or a national production is sold to territories, to 3 territories who did not invest into the project. So we should at least try to achieve this. We can fail, but the problem I see is that nobody tries to achieve it at least. So the films are funded, then they are made, and lots of them, they get 8,000 admissions or 20,000 admissions, and they have to be happy with 100,000. And 1% of the German inhabitants would be 800,000, not even 1 million. So I think we should at least have more films reaching 500,000 or 1 million in Germany, which is not the case.
That's fascinating. I can't imagine what the numbers are in the States. Well, we've reached about an hour and a half. I really want to thank everyone for getting through the scramble. I'm glad that we all made it here today. This will be recorded and posted as soon as I connect up with Romana and Chris, who run the posting for the different groups. And then we will make a decision about when to meet next and who would like to present. Feel free to send that on to Romana. I'll find out if she's okay, or send it on to me so that the council can help figure out a time when everyone can get together. But this was wonderful. Let us please thank Gabriele for making a presentation to us this morning. That was very lovely. And it's
Thank you
always
for having
engaging.
me.
Thank you.
Good
Thank you.
evening.
Yeah, a good evening, good morning, good day, exactly. But it's always wonderful to engage. This is a lovely way to keep people together during the conferences, so that I hope that we will see some of you, if not in Adelaide this September, in Oxford in 2026. It'll be Mexico City in 2027 and Milan in, no, am I getting it right? 2025, Adelaide, 2026, Oxford, 2027, Mexico City, 2028, Milan. So you have your calendar to plan. Everybody have a lovely day, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.